Coming up on the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
So the cat is being let outside, apparently. She's been meowing inside. One of the dogs is coming out too.
When I was 16, I had a note in the back of my car as I was driving around on school property with a case of open bottles of wine in the back of my car that said, "It's okay, it's for a science project," signed by my science teacher.
Which do you relate to more, Yakima, Palm Springs of Washington, or Yakivegas?
And now, the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
The cell phones have been silenced. The wine has been poured. And just like that, the podcast begins. Welcome to episode 16 of the Tall Mike Wine Podcast. I'm Mike Stone, your tall and wine-obsessed host. The podcast heard in 22 countries, on 5 continents, in 41 of these United States, and the District of Columbia. I'm waiting for the people to find us in Iowa, Mississippi, and some other states that remain out of the loop. But recently, we picked up listeners in such major cities as Yelm, Washington, Swampscott, Massachusetts, Selma, North Carolina, and Sun City, Arizona. Wherever you are, hello! I'm so glad you're dialed in. Thank you for your time. And do me a favor, if you listen on Apple Podcasts, give us some love in the form of stars and reviews. They tell me it helps a lot. Let's start the conversation. My guest is in Washington State, beaming in through the magic of technology. She is a winemaker. Her family grows grapes and runs a vineyard that's definitely on the list of highly sought-after grapes by wineries in Washington State. Hello, Kerry Shiels.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
From where are you speaking to us today?
I am in the booming metropolis of Sunnyside. It is larger than Yelm, Washington. We're in the middle of the Yakima Valley, which is where most of the grapes come from in Washington.
Sunnyside is pretty much right in the middle of the valley between Yakima and the area they call the Tri-Cities.
Historically, it's always been the center of the wine industry. It's where some of the oldest vines in the state, they go back to the early 1900s, are right here in Sunnyside.
I am doing a little al fresco recording today. It's my day off from Nicholson Ranch, where I typically record the podcast. So I'm home in Novato, California, and I'm outside because there's too much happening inside the house, if you know what I'm saying. So if you hear some weird cuts in the background sounds on this episode, it's because I'm outside, and I do have the lovely wind chimes over my head. So you'll be hearing those, which is kind of nice.
Nice.
Kind of like you're getting a massage. One of those, new agey things. We'll see what happens when the UPS man drives by. Rumble, 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 rumble. I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing both the name of your winery and your vineyard correctly. So let's get on the record with the official pronunciations. The wine you make is called Cote Bonneville.
Yep. Cote Bonneville.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So you don't do any weird Cote Bonneville, weird French?
Well, no, for a couple reasons. One, my French is horrible. Two, it's actually, the name comes from, it's a family name, and the estate Cote Bonneville was built by my great-great-grandfather, Napoleon DuBrul, which is where DuBrul Vineyard comes from. We planted the vineyard, sold grapes for a decade. We're already known as one of the most interesting, unique, distinctive sites in Washington when my parents decided to start the winery. And we still have people who buy our fruit and vineyard designate our fruit. To be consistent but not exactly the same, they named the winery Cote Bonneville after this estate that Napoleon built. And because his family came down, they were French-Canadian before they came to the U.S., they've got a completely different pronunciation than the French do. And so and we have the Bonneville Dam. We don't want to be, we're not that French. We're very Washington.
Is the Bonneville Dam named after them?
No, unfortunately not. Should be, though.
So they brought the name with them, and there was already a dam.
I don't remember when the dam was built. Now that I'll have to go look that up.
There is a thing that I do on the podcast occasionally. If we talk about French things, I go into this French accent. And I was about to slip into that. Cote Bonneville. Oui, no. Merci.
Yeah.
All right. And the vineyard, you already said it. DuBrul.
DuBrul. Mm-hmm.
DuBrul.
Mm-hmm.
DuBrul. DuBrul. As you said, it's some of the most interesting and incredible fruit in all of the state of Washington. If you look at the Washington wine selection in any nice wine store, you're going to find some single vineyard wines made by other wineries that say DuBrul Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon.
Or even if they don't say it on the name. I mean, like last year, some of our Merlot made the top 100, Wine Spectator's top 100 list as a pretty important component of the DeLille D2 blend. So it goes into lots of different wines. Sometimes it's on the label, sometimes it's not. Yeah, we currently have sold to most of the who's who in Washington wineries.
If it's not on the label, it's in the tech sheet if you bother to look deeply into where the grapes came from.
Or just drink Cote Bonneville wine and then you know you're getting the good stuff.
Oh, there you go.
It's easy.
So let's talk about this wine called Cote Bonneville. What's the case production of your wine?
Oh, we're tiny. We make about 2,500 cases a year. The thing that, well, it's especially tiny considering that so many small estate wineries in almost everywhere else in the world are much more focused on one thing. And because Washington is such a unique place, especially the Yakima Valley, we grow 6 different varietals that are incredibly different. And so we can make all these very different styles of wine. I make a Spätlese style Riesling that's one of the best Rieslings in the state, planted right next to our Cabernet that is one of the highest rated bottles of wine to ever come out of the state of Washington. And there's not a lot of vineyards in the world that can do that. There's not a lot of places in the world you can do that. It's why Yakima is such a really, really, really interesting growing region. Mom and Dad founded the winery to focus on classic styles. So we do Bordeaux blends from 2 different areas in the vineyard. We do a Burgundian style Chard. And then I came home. Well, when did I come home? I came home in 2009 and they started the winery in 2001. And then I made life more complicated with Syrah and Riesling and Rosé, Cab Franc Rosé. And now we have a whole second label and we make so many different wines that they're all.
When I think about all the different labels that I see DuBrul Vineyard on, I wonder how much fruit is there? Wait a minute. That must be a huge vineyard.
No, it's tiny. Well, it's not tiny. It's 45 acres under vine.
Okay, that's pretty big.
Yeah, it's not.
I mean, comparatively. I work at a small estate winery in Sonoma, and we have 31 acres of vines. And we make about 5,000 cases a year because we don't sell any fruit. Nobody gets it. Just us.
Yeah, see, we've had people like Owen Rowe who've been getting fruit from their rows in the vineyard longer than we've been a winery. We have some great long-term relationships. And besides, the cellar is mostly my mom and myself, and there's only so many punch downs I want to do. That's why we're at 2,500 cases, because that's how many punch downs I can handle.
Twice a day?
Yeah.
Okay. So the cat is being let outside, apparently. She's been meowing inside.
Well, my dog is...
She's here. One of the dogs is coming out, too.
Oh, good. My dog is laying at my feet, sleeping.
So what's in your glass, Kerry?
My glass, because it is a lovely afternoon, is Cab Franc Rosé. Like I said, I make rosé. I love dry, crisp, refreshing white wines. And our Chard is super textural. Our Riesling is Spätlese style and has some residual sugar. So for me, this totally fills that. It's kind of it hits on all cylinders. It's dry and great acidity, and it's refreshing, and it's got good complexity, and it's not super light. It's got not as full bodied as a red, but it's bigger than like a Sauvignon Blanc, for example. And so it's a great afternoon wine. Let
me see the color. That's very pale. How long do you leave the skins in the tank?
Oh, not long at all. When I was working at Mondavi, Genevieve used to call this onion peel, classic onion peel. And it's Cab Franc, and so it doesn't get a lot of color. I'm not trying to make a big fruity patio pounder, electric pink wine. It's more classy, classic, elegant.
It's almost like you're trying to make white wine out of Cab Franc grapes. Yeah. So you're just getting the pure essence of the juice.
A little bit of color. Yeah, it's like a white wine, just a little pink.
What's the vintage on that?
I think this is a 2019, actually, because the 2020 I drank last night, and this is what's in my cellar today.
I'm sorry that you don't have an official Tall Mike Wine podcast coaster to set your glass on.
Oh.
But I will mail you some.
Oh, please do. That's super fun.
Isn't that great?
That is great. Instead,
coasters. I have stickers.
I have ducks.
Well, those Those are nice. You do. At least you have a coaster.
I have a coaster.
You're civilized.
They're not as cool as yours, but
It's true. I am mailing this out to anyone listening to the podcast who would like some coasters to have under their glass while they listen. You can email me at tallmikewine@gmail.com.
You should get some coasters, guys. It makes you civilized, apparently.
That's right. How did it all start? Let's talk childhood. Growing up in the east side of Washington State, small town life. Did you grow up there in Sunnyside?
I did grow up in Sunnyside.
Tell me all about it. Tell me about your childhood.
Let's see. I grew up on a farm, and my family had Concord grapes when I was really little and decided to expand the farm in 92. They planted these wine grapes because they were wine drinkers. They were into wine and hung out as professionals in an agricultural region. They hung out with other professionals, which included professional winemakers.
So they planted the vineyard in 1992? Mm-hmm. And how old were you then?
I was in 7th grade. And I know this because that was also the year that I needed a science project. I worked on something wine related, and I made my first wine in 7th grade. When I was 16, I had a note in the back of my car as I was driving around on school property with a case of open bottles of wine in the back of my car that said, "It's okay. It's for a science project," signed by my science teacher. She says,
"Oh my God, that's hilarious."
So,
were you a wine drinker then?
Yeah.
I mean, on the weekends with your friends, were you partying a little?
Actually, I won't just say my friends in middle school and high school, even my friends in college, we didn't have the budget to drink the kind of wines that I liked. So I always drank with my parents. I drank wine with my folks and my family because I always drank good wine. I never went through that. I missed out. I never went through that phase of drinking crappy wine and then realizing what good wine was. When I got to grad school, everybody had that like discussion of what was that wine that got you into wine. And I'm like, I don't have an answer to that. I never had, like, I was never not, I don't remember ever not being into wine, really. Like,
all right, let's just set the record straight. You did not miss out by going through that stage of drinking Boone's Farm or Franzia from a box. You did not miss out.
Yeah, I never did that.
You went a different way. It was a better way. Okay.
So well, I'm glad you think so.
It's funny that you mentioned 1992 because that is the year that I began my stint in Yakima. I lived in Yakima from 1992 to 1995. I was working at 94.5 Cats. The radio station. This is before I was Tall Mike Wine.
I have been on that radio station.
I have. Recently? We were playing all the rock classics.
A couple years ago when I talked about wine.
All right. Well, I did afternoons on the station from 92 to 95. Right after I got to town, my mom was visiting, and we drove down into wine country. It was late in the day, and it was one of those things where you screw around all morning, and then it's like, what do you want to do? Oh, let's drive down into wine country and find a winery and taste some wine. And we'd never been. So we drive around, and we see a sign for Porteous Winery, and we drive down through the country roads, and it's getting darker. It's getting foggier. So we're thinking we're going to get lost. But we didn't. We found our way to Porteous, and Paul Porteous was there in the tasting room, very gracious and nice, and we tasted some wine. A few months later, I was invited wine tasting by some of my coworkers. When I started visiting wineries regularly, I started to really see like, oh, this is a totally different concept of drinking. This is finding your people and really understanding that what we're doing is something a little bit different. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not just, oh, we're going to a party. We're going to drink.
I think that's one of the fun things about wine is that you can just go to a party and have a glass of wine, but there's so much more to learn about and to get interested in, and between the people and the places and the weather and the vintage and the grapes, and you can't ever know everything there is to know about wine.
That's what I tell people that come into Nicholson Ranch. I manage the tasting room, and I'm there 5 days a week, and people come in, and you've probably experienced this too. People come into your tasting room, and they feel they have to confess to you, I don't know anything about wine. And I'm like, okay, that's okay that you don't know anything about wine. I know some stuff. I'll teach it to you. But just know there's so much to know that nobody's ever going to know it all.
No. I mean, and the thing is, I'm supposed to know more about wine than you. I have a master's degree in wine. I've made wine on 3 continents. Like, you're not supposed to know more about tannins than I do, because you're not supposed to read 3 feet high stacks of research papers on phenolics. Like, I'm supposed to know these things. it's okay to come in and ask me these questions. And that being said, then I go hang out with sommeliers because I have depth in one or two areas.
But it's the thing with wine. People feel intimidated.
There's a lot of people who think that because they know something means they should lord their knowledge over other people. But that's not just wine. That's everything.
So you grew up there close to Yakima, which is sort of the main town in that area. Which do you prefer more? Which do you relate to more? Yakima, Palm Springs of Washington, or Yakivegas?
I'm going to go with Yakivegas because Palm Springs does not have the wonderful diurnal temperature shift. And we don't really have palm trees. We have the sign that says the Palm Springs of Washington. But, Vegas is someplace that you go, that you aspire to. It's lots of fun. There's cool stuff to do. And we're getting more restaurants. We're getting more fun things to do from a tourism perspective. So we can aspire to be Yakivegas. When I moved to Napa the first time, I was like, I feel like I'm living in Disneyland for adults, for wine. And so Disneyland, Vegas, Yakima, it's a aspirational goal in some ways. Not completely.
There you go. It's Fantasyland.
Yeah.
You can have everything you want. You can have the best wine made in the world, and you can visit the winery.
Somebody told me the other day that I live in a movie. I have a movie life.
That may be true. So let's talk about your career change. I met you quite a while ago at a tasting in San Francisco and was all excited because you were from Washington representing your winery. And you said, yes, I started off in one direction. I went off. I left home. I went to school. You went to engineering school.
Yep.
Where did you go to school for that?
Well, my goal when I was a kid making wine was actually not to spend my whole life in Sunnyside. I spent a year as an exchange student as a Rotary exchange student in Sweden, which was awesome. I took like 4 languages and music and dance and nothing scientific at all. Came back and I went to Chicago to Northwestern, got my degree in mechanical engineering. And then I was hired by Fiat for part of a leadership development program. So I moved to Italy for a couple of years and that was really fun because, I worked in prototyping. So we made cars by hand in my factory. And my boss also had the testing facilities. So he was in charge of the test tracks. So I got to go drive around the test tracks and I got to do some international business because I spoke English relating to the test tracks. It was pretty cool. So
did you speak Italian?
By the time I left, I did. I mean, my job was project management and I worked with a bunch of people who didn't speak English. So I got to learn.
So when did you go off to Italy?
I graduated from college in 2002. So I was there from 2002 to 2004. And then I got transferred within the group back to Chicago and worked as an engineer for another couple of years in Chicago.
And in that time, your parents opened a winery.
Yeah. And I decided that making wine is way more fun than making cars and tractors.
Who was making the wine initially?
Well, my folks were thankfully very humble and aware of the fact that they weren't winemakers. And if the goal is to make world-class wine, then you need competency and proficiency. So Stan Clark was our founding winemaker. He started the Walla Walla Community College program subsequently. He'd worked with us in the vineyard for years previous to that, so he really knew the fruit.
So you're hearing about this winery happening while you're gone. What pushed you to go to Davis?
I made wine when I was in 7th grade, and it wasn't good. I knew that competency and proficiency were a thing because I didn't want to make crappy wine. I wanted to make good wine. And everybody I knew who was a winemaker went to Davis. Like, that's what you did. That's how you become a winemaker.
The University of California at Davis is the preeminent school in the United States, or at least was at the time. There are a few more of them now. There's one in Washington. Washington State University has a big program.
The timing that I went to Davis was amazing because a lot of the professors that I worked with, that I did my thesis with, were at the pinnacle of their career. They were at they've since retired. And there was so much knowledge. All of the people who really worked to do all of the research and the science and build Napa and Sonoma as they were growing through their heydays. I mean, really this golden cohort of people who were just incredibly knowledgeable, and the access to everything and all the resources there was phenomenal. I mean, now a guy that worked in my lab is teaching there. I mean, Davis is a special place. There's so much institutional knowledge that even when you bring new people on, it's not like you start over. There's definitely something to be said for people who have 35, 40 years of research and industry kind of co-op experience, extension experience, helping guide you and teach you.
And where did you go after Davis? You said you went to other continents to make wine.
I worked in Napa at Joseph Phelps, and then I went to Australia and worked at DuBrul and made some Shiraz from pre-phylloxera 1860s vines.
Wait, where did you work in Australia?
DuBrul in Central Victoria.
I don't know it.
It's a weird winery in that it's, if people know it, it's super culty. I mean, there were people who'd been coming to the cellar door for 30 years and knew the winery better than I did. And then there's a lot of people who've never heard of it. But it's the Marsanne from 1947 plantings is on the wine list at the House of Commons in London. It's some 1860s vines. It's on the poster of the iconic wines of Australia. And
I did not know that.
Yeah, and yet a lot of people have never heard of it.
I really love the wines from the Barossa Valley and McLaren Vale. Mm-hmm. And I was about to go there at the beginning of the pandemic. I had planned a trip, and it was the last week of March 2020.
Oh, well, you'll get there. You'll get there.
I hope so.
So
spell the name of the winery you were working for there.
Tahbilk.
Tahbilk.
It's worth going to Australia and leaving the city centers just to hear the various accents. I learned so many great words and expressions. And
I had an Australian with a group of people at the winery this past weekend, and they were talking about going back to the Airbnb and cooking. And a couple of the guys were like, yeah, we do most of the cooking and this guy helps. And I said, well, you've got to have an Aussie there. So in case you want to throw a shrimp on the barbie. And he looked at me and he said, we call them prawns, mate.
They do.
I said, that's not what Paul Hogan told me.
I swear I worked with Crocodile Dundee. It was fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
My wine today is French.
Yeah? What are you drinking?
The wine that I have in my glass is from the Gigondas region of France. One of the big families there, Famille Perrin, who I guess started Chateau de Beaucastel. Mm-hmm. But they've got vineyards all over the Rhone region. Gigondas is near Châteauneuf-du-Pape. They grow primarily Grenache. This is the designate is Vieilles, which means old vines. The wine is called Largne, which is L'Argne. So maybe it's Largne, like sauté. And it's a Gigondas from 2012. And it's lovely. You know, it's perfect for a warm afternoon because it's not too heavy.
Yeah.
Some of the reviews I read of this wine were that it was a monster, but it's opening up. It's not too heavy. I think the fact that it has 9 years of age on it is making it, it's very floral.
I am super excited right now that you're drinking that because next year I'm doing a river cruise going to the Rhone, and it's going to be, we're starting in Burgundy and going down through all the places to ending up in Provence. It'll be.
Is this the thing you're going to do with your wine club people?
Yeah, I did one a couple years ago. We went to Germany, and it was so much fun to drink Riesling on the boat. It's a great way to travel.
Would you like to give a little plug to your winery's website if anybody wants to sign up or get to know you and your wines?
If you want to hear about all the fun things we're doing, I would learn more about the wines. I would highly recommend checking out our website or following us on any of the socials. CoteBonneville.com, CoteBonneville.com. And
I'll put that in the show notes
awesome.
For this episode of the podcast.
And yeah, all of our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, they're all Cote Bonneville. Except for on Instagram, I also have one for DuBrul Vineyard, which is cool. I show pictures, just stories of sunshine every day from the vineyard.
Are you getting into and through veraison yet?
Yes, we are netting the vines because there are apple orchards all around the vineyard that the birds like to hang out in. And then as soon as the grapes turn purple and start ripening and get sweet and delicious, they come over and they eat all of our grapes.
The birds, they're like, oh, these apples are good, but those grapes over there,
exactly.
That's the shit.
Exactly. I mean, if you're in a place where you have vineyards and vineyards and vineyards, they don't have as many birds. If you're in a place like apple orchards where there's tons of trees for birds' nests, we have to net the whole vineyard or else the birds will eat everything. Actually, our vineyard used to be apples, but the apples never did well because apples need soil and we don't have any. So
what's the soil?
It's a basalt upthrust, but the ancient Columbia River used to flow over the vineyard. And so it's really unique geology because we've got like river rocks from the Canadian Rockies, from the ancient Columbia, and the river would flow and dry up. So there's calcium carbonate, which is functionally, it's not technically, but it's the same thing as limestone on top of a basalt hillside. So, and you don't normally find river rocks or limestone at the top of the hill, right? Those things are usually down at the bottom of the hill. But
except at one point, the top of the hill was the bottom of the hill.
Exactly. But Oregon is pushing up on Washington, those pushy Oregonians, and actually rotating the state. And so we're getting these nice east-west trending ridges that are going up. So we have a whole south-facing hillside that, it's unique because most rivers, if you think about it, they run north-south. Like we're starting next year in the Rhone, we're starting at the top of the river, we're starting north and we're heading south. And if you were going to do the Yakima, you'd start west and go east.
What about the Columbia River?
Columbia River starts north and it used to go south, but because of all these hills being upthrust, it got diverted from going over our vineyard. It goes now down around over to the Tri-Cities and then back because again of these ridge lines. So
the big part of it is east-west, the border between Oregon and Washington.
Oh, but the big part, that's not the big part of the river. The big part of the majority of the...
That's a big part of the river.
It's a national scenic area. It's the most photographed part of the river, but the river starts up in Canada. The Columbia River system is the second largest river system in North America. It starts way up in Canada, and something like 60% of the watershed of the Columbia River is in Canada, which is north of us.
I like hanging out with wine scientists because I am 180 degrees out from being a wine scientist. I'm all about the touchy-feely aspect of wine. The smells, the label design, the flavors.
That's fun too. But it all...
The warm feeling I'm getting right now from drinking this wine in the middle of the afternoon after not having very much lunch.
So you left Washington Yakima in 1995.
Yes.
How often do you come back?
I was just there. We saw each other. Remember? Mm-hmm. I visited Walla Walla and then Yakima in November of last year. But prior to that, I had not been in Washington wine country in quite a while. I lived in Spokane from 1995 to 2003 and visited Walla Walla one time during that span. And I think that might have been the last time I visited Washington wine country.
But at least you're still drinking Washington wines.
Oh, lots of it. It almost gets redundant for me to post it on Instagram like, oh, I'm drinking another Washington wine.
No, keep doing it.
Because I love those wines.
One of the reasons Mom and Dad started with classically styled wines is because 20 years ago, nobody outside of Washington knew that we made wine, that we grew wine.
Right.
It's exciting to see people in other states that now know that Washington has wine grapes and makes
right. They
wines.
Already know wine and are turned on to Washington wines like, oh, this is good. Yeah. Whereas me, my earliest formation as a wine drinker was with those wines. So to me, that is wine. And then I had to go to the other regions and be like, oh, they make good wine too. Oh, look, the French make wine.
Oh, yeah, they don't suck. At least if you started in Washington, your standards were already really high, so you didn't... My
standards are very high,
yes.
That's
good.
You spent some time in California making California wine. Mm-hmm. Do you have any California cabs or other various California wines you love?
Well, I am partial to the wines that I help make. So I do like the Phelps wines. I like the Mondavi wines. To me, I have a personal connection to those wines.
It's familiarity, which is cool. You've been there. You know those grapes.
And I love drinking great wine from great people.
It almost baffles me how the world of wine is growing. The new regions, here in California, you keep going east, you keep going north, you keep going south from, the epicenter, Napa, Sonoma, more and more wine. I just think, who's drinking it all?
Well, hopefully everybody's drinking wine and more of it. I mean, there's endless things to discover, and you want to be drinking wine from around the world, and you want to be drinking wine from different places, and you want to be, but like you were saying, there's a lot of Washington wine. It's almost redundant in your cellar. There's always those favorites. But if you don't know what everything else tastes like, how do you know, how can you be confident that it's your favorite? Maybe it's that I'm a scientist, but more research is needed. The hypothesis always needs to be tested. And, sensory science is an important thing.
So you can say, I have to continue drinking wine because I'm a scientist.
Because I'm a scientist. Yep.
What is your favorite time of the wine year?
I love spring in the valley because because we have real winters here, like they didn't have in California.
Yes.
We have real winter. So when you come out of real winter, it's so fun to see the days getting longer, everything's blooming, and we have so much diverse agriculture that it's not just like the grapevines are waking up. It's the cherries are in bloom, the apples are in bloom, the alfalfa starts popping up from out the ground. When the hops start growing, because we grow 25 to 30% of the hops in the world, and they grow super fast. And so to watch the changes every day with all the different crops is just fantastic. And it's really magical. I mean, watching everything evolve and develop throughout the year in the summer everything looks so different every day. You walk up in the vineyard and more is purple and things are really dynamic and changing. And then of course, harvest. Harvest is both my favorite time, and I get to the end of it and I'm like, okay, I'm really tired and I need a nap. Because again, there's a lot of winemakers who, depending on the size of your winery, who do one task or different things. But when you're little, like we are, I do everything. And so
you're doing it all.
Yeah. So, which is, again, I love it. It's super fun, but I get to a certain point where I need a nap. Again, this is why the fact that it's seasonal is great. In the winter, I'm working in the winery, but that's when I get a nap and to go skiing and start all over again.
Time to kill, which is good.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on the podcast. Okay. And even though you've not yet listened to it.
Well, thanks for having me. And
I'm not done yet. I'm just saying thanks for coming on the podcast, because this leads into the part of the podcast I like to call, tell me about podcasts you do listen to.
This is going to be a really short part of the podcast. I generally listen to podcasts that I have been on, but I am bad at that lately as well. But the other podcast that I really am loving right now, the only podcast I'm really loving right now, to be fair, is a music theory podcast. It's like Intro to Music 101 or something like that. Oh. It's a couple of music professors who have this podcast for like music students or people who want to be professional musicians. And I took piano lessons and I played instruments when I was a kid. And a piano is not an easy instrument if you move a lot, especially if you're like changing continents like I did. Like they're not portable. So I didn't.
But keyboards.
Even a keyboard is hard to carry internationally.
A big one,
right?
Yes.
Because the plugs change, and it's not a guitar. It's definitely not a flute. I recently, like around Christmas, started taking piano lessons again, and had this massive, like I've forgotten so much. So I've been listening to this music podcast to kind of remind myself, brush up on all the things that I used to know, and it's fun to have hobbies other than eating and drinking and gardening. And I mean, the problem with wine is that everything we do for work is what people do for fun. Like, what do you do for fun? If you're anybody normal, a normal human being, you get together and eat.
We just have more fun.
You get together with your friends and you eat and drink. Well, what do you do if you're a winemaker? That's what you do for work. But it's important to have balance, and it's important to have things outside of that. It's kind of nerdy, but I'm all into classical music these days.
Speaking of nerdy, now you may appreciate this because this is a podcast that I am recently into, and it's about music. Okay. But it's about more contemporary music, hosted by a guy who is a music geek, and it's called Keynotes.
Okay, I'm going to check it out.
It's hosted by a guy named Cole Kushner, who I want to come on my podcast because he's in Sacramento. He's not far from me.
No, that's so far
And I started listening to the show, and it was new a few weeks ago. And then today I listened to the newest episode, and he said, "This is the last episode of this season." I'm like, no. He did one show on the James Bond movie themes. where you have all these recurring things that happen in all the songs going back to the beginning of James Bond when it was instrumental into like when they started having contemporary singers sing these songs. It's amazing. That's episode 6 of Keynote.
Okay. Mine is called Music Student.
It's only on Spotify.
Mine is Music Student 101. But
Music Student 101?
The cool thing, as you're saying this, music and wine are very similar, right? Like if you know a little bit of theory, if you know a little bit of how it works, it's so much more interesting.
Right. Wow. What a revelation. I love that. Because you can enjoy both of them knowing nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
You just tap your toe to the music. Yeah. Oh, I like this. I tap my toe to it. But if you know a little bit about the way it all works, it can, not always, but can improve your enjoyment of the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's, wow. I love that. That might be my favorite takeaway from this episode. Right there. Tell me, if you were stranded on a desert island and you had one wine with you, what would you hope that it would be?
You mean like style of wine or actual bottling?
Either.
We'll go with style. So,
okay.
I would say, if it's not my own wine, because that's a cheesy answer.
Yes.
And
thank you for knowing that.
Although, it would get points for the diversity. But my enological home away from home is Piedmont. And because that's where I lived in Italy, I was a grown-up and had an income and could afford to buy my own wines. And I lived there and I knew a bunch of producers and I did a bunch of, it was just such a formative part of my career development, wine development. Your early 20s, your personal development. I love the wines from Piedmont. So Barolo, Barbaresco, that or Riesling.
Very nice.
That or Riesling.
Or Riesling.
I love Riesling.
That's one end of the spectrum to the other.
I realized the other night the parts of my cellar that have the most depth because I have the most patience because I know that those are the wines that age really well are Riesling and Piedmont. I actually the other night drank a wine that was a Riesling that's older than I am and it was delicious.
That's because it was your birthday.
It was my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. It was
We are recording this
good.
The day after your birthday,
yes,
right?
Yes, we are. 1976 Mosel Baron-Auschwitz level Riesling. So good.
Did it have like petroleum on the nose?
No. And it didn't have a ton of botrytis either. It was lemony and it was fresh and it was delicious. And I was really, I would never have guessed it was from 76. If you blinded me on that wine, I would never have guessed it was that old.
Somebody must have been storing that wine like in premium location. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's fun.
Maybe you listen to it.
I'll listen to it.
You don't have to. You could listen to some previous episodes though.
I don't have any internet service in the winery, and which I love because I go to the winery and I focus and I don't have to worry about distractions. But if I don't download things before I go into the winery, I just missed the opportunity.
Here's when people listen to podcasts: when they're driving, when they're exercising, when they're doing the dishes after dinner. So think about that.
I could do the dishes.
The Tall Mike Wine Podcast was conceived, is written, produced, edited, and maintained by yours truly. I am also the janitor. If you have questions, feedback, or suggestions for guests, send me an email. If you're comfortable giving me your home address, let me send you some coasters or stickers. They're pretty cool. They're pretty cool, aren't they?
They're very cool.
Thank you.
If you want to send me your home address and you want some wine, then go to CoteBonneville.com.
My email is tallmikewine@gmail.com. There are pictures of today's session on Instagram at tallmikewine. I'd love it if you followed me there. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave a rating and review. It helps. I can't achieve total podcast world domination without your help. Please. From my garden in Novato, California, with a kitty cat sitting within my eye shot. This has been episode 16 of the Tall Mike Wine Podcast. Thanks for your time. See you soon. Cheers.